So this opening section in Solomon's memory is what his father taught him when he was a boy. Now, this could be exactly what David said to him when he was growing up. It could be that David sat Solomon down one day and told him these few lines of advice, or lectured him a few times, gave him a speech that really stuck with him, that he remembers still. But I don't think that's how sons learn, and I don't really think that's how daughters learn. Sure, there's things we remember our parents saying to us when we were growing up, but for how many of us we could say what Solomon's saying here in these verses, that, when I was a kid, my dad said, and then list like 4 lines of text verbatim of what our parents said to us in a, sit down, let me tell you how it is speech. That's probably not the case for many of us. It's like my dad would say growing up, it's better than a kick in the head. And I just remember that as a way of saying, yeah, that's really unfortunate. Life is not that hard or not that bad. It's better than a kick in the head. Kind of as a mantra, just to remind us, right? I remember that one, and I could probably recite a couple more things my parents would say about life, but I can't really write a paragraph quotation of something that was said to me verbally. But I can write for you, and probably the case for many of you, pages about what my mom and my dad and my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, my older brother and sister, my church family growing up taught me. I probably can't write for you what they said, but I can write pages about what they taught me. And that's what's key. There's a giant difference between saying truth and teaching truth. Huge difference between saying truth and teaching truth. And what I want us to consider is how good teachers teach and how learners learn. How good mentors show people the way to go, and how it is that their followers at some point take the reins themselves and do it by themselves. How it is that we're bringing up the next generation. And I don't think we learn the most crucial life lessons primarily by sitting down and listening to a speech. Maybe we do sometimes, but I think we learn by observing someone's life that we want to mimic, asking what principles do they live by, and then working those principles into our own lives. Or the darker side of that, observing someone's life that we do not want to mimic, asking what principles they live by, and then learning from their failures and avoiding the practices of the wrecked life. Our actions will either legitimize our message, our actions will either legitimize what we say, or completely disqualify our credibility. That's the truth, isn't it? The saying, do as I do, or do as I say, not as I do, is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And it's the dumbest thing you've ever heard. It's the dumbest thing because no one is going to take seriously someone who speaks the right things to do and never does them, or someone who tells people to avoid a certain behavior or a habit while dabbling in that habit themselves, or being totally committed to that behavior they said to avoid. No one will take that person seriously, even if what they're saying is true. Their words will be empty and they won't carry any weight. So what is taught verbally about life has to be lived tangibly by the teacher in order for the learner to soak in that lesson. So I see Solomon's reflection here on what his dad taught him as probably a combination of things David actually said to Solomon at one point, maybe frequently, but also what Solomon learned just from watching his dad. We often hear sons say about their fathers, he taught me, let's say, the value of hard work and of self-sacrifice. And what they probably don't mean is that one day, like after dinner, my dad, came over with a notebook and had this equation written out and a graph that proved that if you work hard, statistically, you'll end up in a better situation. You see, like, these statistics I've put together. Or if you're self-sacrificing, you're more likely to get married, and your wife will trust you, and you'll grow a family, and you'll probably be a good father. Like, do you see how I'm proving this to you? Just go do that. That's probably not what sons mean when they're reflecting positively on their dads. Rather, they probably would say something like, every day, they were like reflecting on growing up, every day my dad would wake up early, he'd make us breakfast, he'd go to work all day, he'd come home, he'd take care of our mom, he'd take care of us kids, he'd go to bed, and he'd do it all over again. Then every weekend, he'd take us to church where he served the body of Christ. He'd go above and beyond what was essential to us surviving at the cost of his own energy, his sleep, his convenience, to ensure that we were provided for and loved well. And by doing that, he taught me the value of hard work and self-sacrifice.